Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Galit Speaks podcast. I have an amazing guest speaker today that I'm super excited about, a personal friend, and on the board of a nonprofit with me. I'd like to introduce you all to Niko Kowell. Niko Kowell is a NAUI SSI Dive Instructor, founder and owner of Narwhal Divers, a community organizer, and an expert in LGBTQ health and communities. He also uses he, him pronouns and identifies as a queer trans person. Niko's 20 plus year experience in diving and LGBTQ activism give him a unique perspective and insight on how we can better support each other and build a more inclusive, accessible, and affirming dive community for all. Thank you for being here, Niko.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let me ask well, first of all, how did you get into diving?
It's funny. So I grew up in Ohio. And so when people hear that, they're always like, wait, hold on. You grew up in a landlocked state. Well, there's a river, but it's pretty gross. Uh, but my parents I grew up in a split household, but my parents both loved the ocean. And so we would often go to Florida or go to the Caribbean. And I spent a lot of time snorkeling and just being fascinated by the underwater world. And so for my high school graduation present, my mom bought me lessons. So I learned to dive in Cincinnati back when you actually went to a classroom and had a book. No, there was no e-learning.
Yeah.
um, and then I did my certification dives in a rock quarry in Indiana, which is like a dirty, muddy hole. Uh, but I didn't care because even in the pool, I was just so excited. I was like, I'm breathing underwater. This is so rad. The quarry was cold. It was like Monterey cold. So that was kind of my first taste of diving and what started it all.
That's awesome. That's amazing because a lot of times it's something that I know as like I'm a scuba diver and this was something I had to do on my own. And I also did it in a classroom, but I actually got lucky because the college that I went to offered it as a course
Cool.
and I got 3 credits to learn how to scuba dive. So it was like, whoa, totally blew my mind that I was able to do that. Um, but yeah, a lot of people that are watching this are probably people that are either thinking about it or have had to do it on their own. So I want to ask you a little bit about being queer. When did you know that you were? When did you come out as trans? How did that happen for you?
Well, it's been a journey for sure. I've identified as a lot of different things over the years. Like when I first came out, I was a queer woman. I identified really strongly as a lesbian, and then I was like, well, that's not quite right. And then I was, oh, maybe I'm a bisexual, and then I was like, that's not quite right. And I think the more that I really think about it is that the reason why I identify as queer and trans is it's kind of the most broad way to identify. I'm I My orientation in my mind has really been I'm attracted to people that I'm attracted to. I like people that I like. I try to fit into different categories and I fit into all of them in one way, shape, or form, but not necessarily exclusively. So I like queer because it doesn't pinpoint anything. And so it took me a while to kind of settle on that label. Is probably in college where I was like, oh, I'm queer. And that's when I got lucky that I went to this little hippie school in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. Probably the most liberal part of Ohio. It's just, they knit sweaters for trees and it's a cute little downtown and college town, and queer people are the majority. And so, you could wake up and use a different name or a different pronoun and people got on board immediately. And so it was like a really safe place for me to kind of explore and figure out, and I didn't really know what, and, I started like transitioning or taking hormones, God, like almost 20 years ago. And they still don't really know like long-term effects, but they didn't really know much of anything at that point either. And I didn't really know what I wanted, but I knew that I wanted to own my own gender. And I think like being trans, like I'm not trying, I mean, for some people are like, they're very binary trans folks. They're like, I'm now a man or I'm now a woman. And I absolutely respect that. But for me, like I'm trans, like I'm just a person, like my gender kind of fluctuates. I like the way that I look. I know that I have passing and male privilege, but there's much more to my gender than meets the eye. And that's what I try to pick these labels. I don't really like labels, I mean, because I feel like they often get in the way, but we as humans want to find labels, and so I picked the most broad labels as possible, so that way you can't quite pinpoint what I mean by that, because I don't know, I'll tell you something today and in a year it'll probably be different, because I feel like gender and orientation is an evolution. It's not a you don't go somewhere and just stop, at least in my experience. I'm like, oh, I don't know where I'll be in 5 years or what I'll think in 5 years. But I feel like I'm pretty settled in this like very broad, open, I am who I am type identity.
Yeah. I totally hear that. A lot of times I use the label queer as well, just because it feels like the easiest way to kind of describe something that is super hard to describe. And a lot of people don't necessarily get it. And as humans, we really like to put people into boxes. And so to have like the biggest box possible kind of seems the most fitting while still not confusing everyone.
Yeah, I went to a movie showing at the Ocean Film Festival last weekend, and it was about a trans body surfer, and he said this line that, so I've often thought about like gender as a galaxy. Like it's not a spectrum, it's this like all-inclusive thing. But he like added this line to it. He said, so gender is, a galaxy and I'm just a star in it. And I really loved that, because that's how I think about my gender and my orientation. It's like, it's just this thing, this amorphous thing that is moving and is growing. But I'm one of the stars, and you're one of the stars, right? And everybody's watching is one of the stars. And that's just a really cool like way to think about, I think, gender. If like we are just all part of this big galaxy, this big system, and we're all our own little stars, or maybe some people are planets, or or whatever.
Yeah, I love that. And I wanted to say one of our viewers, Lewis, says hello.
Hey, Lewis.
He said he was also in a classroom and had to read books while learning to dive. So I guess it's not so crazy to meet a lot of people that have done the classroom route. And he knows you through Dive Heart and got to meet you in Cozumel and had you as a buddy during one of the days of diving. Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about Dive Heart?
Yeah, so Dive Heart is an organization that I've known about for quite some time, and I've always been interested in being part of it. And, I'm sure we'll talk more about this later, but being queer and trans, that often can be sometimes a limiting factor in the things that I do, because I'm nervous about it, or I don't know if I'm going to be accepted or supported. so, and Dive Heart was like, it was based in Chicago. So it wasn't like something that was like right there in my face that I could really easily go and sort of like scope out. But I happened to go to the Long Beach Scuba Show, and I went over to the Dive Heart booth, and Jim Elliott, who is the founder and president, was there. And I spent like an hour talking to him, and he is an older white cis man, but he got really emotional about the work that he does, and that's something like I get really emotional when I talk about the work that I do. I think like being vulnerable and crying and all of that is like, I think is a really positive thing, especially despite my feelings about being perceived as a man. Like seeing men cry, I think is a really good thing for the world.
Yeah.
So Jim and I are talking. We're both like kind of weepy, kind of sharing stories. I'm talking about the work that I want to do about creating inclusive environments that's for everybody, but like with a focus on queer and trans people. And he was like, I love it. And so I was like, okay, I connected with the person that runs this organization. I really like him. And then I ended up talking to Tina Marie, who's the executive director, and getting more connected with them. They kind of squeezed me in last minute on the big training trip for Dive Heart that happens in Cozumel every December. And so I went down and did my advanced adaptive dive buddy training. And so basically Dive Heart offers training for adaptive divers, so folks who have disabilities, or for folks that are just divers. They can do the buddy program to help folks dive safely in the water. And so Dive Heart has like a scale system based on the number that the adaptive diver gives us and sort of the skills that they have comfort with or need support with. And that way we know if they need 2 to 3 people in the water with them. And so we did a training for this entire week where basically in the morning I was diving every day with somebody different, including Lewis and a handful of other folks. So we rotated amongst the adaptive divers. So we had different experiences, got connected with different people. And then in the afternoons, we were doing training in the ocean. And so things like we did blind diver drills. So somebody took me into the ocean with a blacked out mask and like took me down to depth and swam me around. And then I did the same thing with them. We had to like ditch our gear and find it again with the blacked out mask and put it back on. We had to practice skills around like if you have a quadriplegic, you have to equalize, manage their buoyancy, everything for them. So we practice with each other, having a full face mask on, equalizing each other, taking each other down, touring each other around. So that way we were, practicing with each other as opposed to like, of course, we don't want to practice for the first time with somebody who actually needs our assistance. Right. And it probably is one of the most challenging and fun things that I've done in my dive career, including like maybe more challenging than some of the instructor course. And I love diving, and I love like adding to my skill set and challenging and pushing myself and trying to be better. And so that part was really fun and appealing, but also just like to be able to, scuba diving is like magic and joy to me, so to be able to help people, any people, have access to that, and I got to, help, like some of the folks were like could swim pretty well through the water. Some of the folks needed more like what they call driving, where we were actually pushing them through the water. And so like I got to take a woman through these tunnels in Cozumel, and I definitely like was like, oh my God, okay, this is like a small tunnel for me by myself, but now I'm managing a second person in this space. But that, that it was so awesome that like I was able to help her do that, and not in a like patronizing way, but like I really like, even with queer and trans people, with women, with folks of color, like I want to create like open, welcoming environments where people can see themselves in diving and be part of diving in whatever way, shape, or form makes sense to them. And so part of me doing my Dive Heart training was that, what the services that I want to offer, I want them to be as inclusive and accessible as humanly possible. I want to be able to help, folks who have a disability dive. And, it's also that trip made me really think about a lot of things, because, we're all adaptive divers. I look at all the divers in my dive shop, like everybody modifies their gear to what works for them.
Yeah.
You know, and so like in the water, we're all equal. And so there's something really beautiful about that like we're there to dive, we're there to have a good time, we're there to be safe. And so I'm actually going next month, like less than like 3 weeks from now, to Key Largo to do my instructor training, my dive heart instructor training with somebody I met on the trip who's a direct instructor trainer, excuse me. And so I'm going to learn to teach the course so that way when I come back to the Bay Area, I can teach people to be buddies. And I'm going to be trying to set up an adaptive program with a local adaptive sports organization here, hopefully. And then the other thing is that I'm trying to coordinate a group of folks to go to the December trip with me. So that way I have like a core of folks that are adaptive dive buddies. That in the future, I want to do like an accessible LGBTQ center trip. So to have enough folks that are actually trained up to support people in the water is kind of one of the foundations. And so at this point, I have about a group of 6 of us that are hopefully going to go in December. We're going to fundraise for the trip.
That's really awesome. I mean, I also got a chance to speak with Jim from Dive Heart, and what he does is amazing. And it is so cool. And you're so right that under the water, we're all equal, and everybody is taking care of everybody all the time. Like we need to, that's why we dive in buddies, right? We look out for each other. And there isn't this, or there shouldn't be this separation between people. And one of the tenets of the nonprofit that we're in together is we are trying to create underwater for all, right? So that everyone has access to the underwater world, no matter who they are, no matter what their income level is, no matter whether they're queer or trans or identify as non-binary or whatever it is. One of the spaces that I feel like we're very lacking is in BIPOC representation in the underwater world. So to be able to have all people and all communities take advantage of the underwater world, and especially people with disabilities, because for them it's sometimes the hardest, right? Because they need to have people like you, people like Jim, that are trained and qualified to help them. So it's really amazing that you're doing that, and you're spearheading that in your area, and just taking all of these steps to make sure that more people experience the underwater world. And I feel like for me, it comes back to, this is something that we have to protect. Most of our world is water. Mm-hmm. And if we don't know it, if people don't swim in it, dive in it, experience it, then they don't know what they have to protect, and they're not as passionate about it. Right. So what you're really doing is creating people that are passionate about the ocean and passionate about our world, and that people who are going to continue on the mission to protect it.
Yeah, I think that's super important. When I teach my open water classes, like a third or so of my actual training is just about like Monterey and the local creatures. And then I have a whole section about how you can volunteer through diving. Whether that's through Dive Heart, like we were just talking about, or like volunteering at an aquarium, or there's Reef Check, and there's like so many different ways to give back. Because I'm making the assumption that if you want to dive, you care about the ocean, or you should care about the ocean. In my mind, like thinking about diversity, inclusion in diving is also thinking about the future of diving. Our world is becoming more like queer and trans and mixed every day. The future of diving is all of us. And, I think about, the vast majority of my instructors have been white straight cis men. And, you know, most of the experiences have been fine. I think part of that is that, you know, I'm white, I'm male passing. I don't always know if people read me as queer or not. I think it kind of depends on the space. But so I think that has given me the ability to kind of navigate these spaces in a way that other folks might not be able to. And so that I'm trying to really like leverage my positionality in this to make it safer for other folks. And, you know, my best friend and I have often talked about that, like if the world or whatever we're trying to do is safe for Black trans women, then it's theoretically safe for all people. I know that's a very like simplistic statement, but I think if you think about it, like when a Black trans woman can walk into a space and feel welcomed and feel accepted and feel supported and not feel othered, because I think that's the other thing. You know, I you know, being trans and having a disability, of course, they're not the same thing, but I definitely connect with the experience of like people find out I'm trans and that's the only thing they want to talk about. Like everything else is like gone out of the room. I have no other like aspects to my personality. And I think that can happen a lot with people who have a disability, where people focus really heavily, you know, on the disability as opposed to like, especially with diving, it's like, who cares? Like all I need to know is what I need to do to keep you safe, which is like you said, that's the buddy system, right? Like I just need to know, because again, everybody's different. Everybody adapts differently, does different things, has different gear, different setups. Like I just need to know what you need from me and vice versa, right? Not a story about, you know, anything about how you got a disability or you know, when you discovered you're trans, which I think is a fine question, but it's like if you first meet on a dive boat, it's a really uncomfortable question. And so I often have told people that like roll the question back in your mind and be like, would you ask a different stranger the same question? Then you probably shouldn't ask me that question. You know, because I'm like most people wouldn't ask a lot of questions people ask me, I think, to other people. And I think sometimes you just kind of have to like think for a second and then ask the question.
Yeah, I totally get that. And from a totally different point of view, right? Because I'm not trans, but as a woman, I've been asked questions that I was like, would you have asked a man that question? Because I don't think you would have. Like, you know, I've been asked things as crazy as like, why are you working? Why don't you just find a husband to take care of you? Like,
are
what?
You
Yeah, I mean, maybe I should have answered, are you offering? But I was like, would you have asked a man that went to college and is sitting here in front of you with a career, why are they working? Why don't they just find a wife to take care of them? Like, seems kind of like a ridiculous question, but I can't imagine you must get like way more ridiculous questions than that.
I mean, I feel like it doesn't happen as much anymore. I mean, part of it is that, you know, I can walk in the world and people don't necessarily know that I'm trans. And so that, I mean, that's a weird thing for me in a lot of ways, because like I always know I'm trans. Like I'm trans. Like just see me. But I get that like, you know, people see me as male, but it allows me to, again, like I spend a lot of time thinking about like, okay, this is who I am in the world. How do I try to make things better? And so like I've been in situations where somebody says something kind of weird or problematic about trans people in front of me, like in a group setting. So this, you know, then I'm assuming they don't think I'm trans, right? Because usually people don't say things like that if there's somebody from that population that they're going to say something problematic about there. And then I can decide like, okay, am I going to answer this question, or not answer the question, but address this as a trans person, or am I going to address this as somebody who they think is a cis man? And just be like cool about it and be like, you know, I don't know why that's not a big deal. Like just use the pronouns that he wants, you know? And so it's been interesting to kind of think about how I can do that, because it is more powerful, which I think is problematic too, right? Like sometimes for people to think that I'm just a cis dude who is like down for trans rights is more powerful than me being a trans person saying that's fucked up because you're talking about me. And that should be more powerful, right? But so I think it's kind of this, how can I use some of my powers for good, and try to shift some of those narratives. And so, yeah, I mean, and also it's how much energy do I have for that today? You know, because like coming out often turns into a much bigger conversation, which sometimes, again, I like have the energy to entertain, and sometimes it's like, I can't do it right now. Let me just, correct the issue, but not go into my whole story about it.
Yeah, and it's actually, you brought up something that we've actually spoken about in the past of like not necessarily, and we spoke about it in a different context, but like approaching people where they're at so that you can make the biggest impact, but not losing who you are in the process. Because I think that's a really, really fine line to walk. And it's something that I definitely struggle with as well, of like wanting to have the person listen to me and not immediately cut me off because I'm saying something that's against, or that they are getting defensive about. And kind of just like approaching them from where they're already standing, and then revealing a little bit more and more later when they're a little bit open.
I think there's so many ways to do activism or to create change. And I've always been the type of person that's kind of a both and like both of those things, all of those things need to happen kind of simultaneously for the change to be created. And so, right now I teach at a shop in San Francisco. I'm out as trans to my coworkers. I have a bio on the website that says I'm trans, but in class, like, I don't talk about being trans because it's not relevant. I'm the instructor there to teach. But, I have a big sticker in my water bottle that I carry around the whole time that says Queer and Trans Dive Club and has my business and Narwhal Divers. And so, like, if you Google me or look me up on the website, you're going to know. And so I think that's one subtle way of doing activism is like just being there. I'm there. Like I taught you all weekend. You liked me. We had fun together. Now you've connected with a trans person, even though you didn't know it. So maybe that'll help shift your ideas about trans people. And so, there's that. And then so I brought up QDDC, or the Queer and Trans Dive Club. So I worked at the same nonprofit job for almost 15 years. And during the pandemic in September 21, I left that job, decided to finally go and pursue my passion of diving, which I've been doing for 20 years, but not professionally. I had gotten my dive master, but I hadn't really done much with it.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm going to go finally see what I can do with that. At least I need a break from the nonprofit world anyway. So I'm going to go try this out. And so I started the QDDC as honestly, like I just wanted more queer and trans dive buddies, and like people that were like me to go diving with, because I've been diving in lots of places with a lot of people and it's great, but there's something that feels safer, more comfortable when I know I'm with other queer and trans folks, or family, so to speak, because, even if I'm on a boat and everything seems cool, like if there's an accident or something and I need like medical care, what is that going to look like? Am I going to be safe? So, I started that, and it originally was just supposed to be, or I had just envisioned it being a local, like, because I'm in San Francisco, like a Monterey Bay, San Francisco thing, but it's kind of grown to becoming this resource group for people. And so like people post about like top surgery, like I want to learn to dive, but I'm having top surgery, because there's not really any research. I mean, and that's part of the problem is like there's not actually an answer to that question because there hasn't really been research on trans people a lot in general, but let alone trans people in diving, right? So there's like generalizations that have to be made, or it's more of like you need to talk to your doctor, but still like the amount of people that replied and like the engagement and making people feel like, oh, I am part of something, I'm a community, there are other queer and trans people like me that are diving, that I can actually ask these questions to, that, you know, have these experiences, I think is really powerful and beautiful. And so now it's just QDDC and it's got people from around the world in it at this moment. And I think we're close to like 250 members and growing. So I don't know exactly what that will grow into. And that's kind of why I just started it as something that I hoped would, as a community organizer and activist, I'm the type of person that follows the community. Doesn't mean that I don't lead. It doesn't mean that I don't, you know, step in and you know, do things. But I think it's really important to listen to what the community is saying and follow that, you know. And so like QDDC was sort of saying, oh, we've got all of these members from all over. We can still post local events, but why don't we open it up so that way there's more people and it's more inclusive of, you know, queer folks around the world that are divers.
Yeah, I absolutely love the community, and it's on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm part of it, and I love the idea of, because I've been a part of like Facebook groups and dive communities before, and it's actually how I met a lot of my dive buddies, including our personal friend Nicole Zellick. Like I met her on a Scuba for Women community on Facebook, and I love the idea of being able to make friends and have dive buddies that I'm comfortable with and that I feel safe with anywhere in the world. And I really think that you opening it up like that creates that type of space, so that, you know, if I want to go diving in another country, I can post in a group and maybe somebody's going there, maybe somebody lives there, but either way, I kind of know already that I'm going to be with a like-minded person and with somebody who I feel comfortable with being my dive buddy.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of already said it, but it's like, yeah, I can go on dive trips, and you know, I have a lot of privilege in terms of being white and passing, so like I have a lot more safety. But in terms of other folks in my community being able to go to dive trips safely, that's a pretty mixed bag. And you know, I was part of there's cultural districts in San Francisco, and one of them is the transgender cultural district. It's the first trans cultural district in all of the country. It was founded by a friend of mine named Aria Saeed, who's an amazing Black trans woman activist, community organizer. But she founded this entrepreneurship program that every year they select about 10 people to be part of this program. And they're trying to basically invest in trans people to build businesses so that we turn around and invest in our community and I hire more trans people, right? And getting out of this sort of nonprofit industrial complex that most of us were stuck in or are stuck in.
Yeah.
And so I actually, this past weekend, they had an alumni day. And so they asked me to come and speak to the alumni, to the new group as an alumni. And I met a trans woman who's from Fiji who wants to develop a travel business specifically to Fiji. And I was like, we got to talk. And, you know, and I was like, yeah, I would love to do a dive trip, because she's not a diver. She's like, well, I'd love to learn, but I'd like love to do a dive trip. And she knows Fiji, so they're like all of the beautiful cultural aspects, you know, the locals that she could bring in, and she's a trans woman. I'm like, this would be such an amazing trip. Actually, my fantasy is I want to all trans liveaboard one day.
That's awesome. And if those of you listening don't know what a liveaboard is, it is heaven. It is basically you out on a boat with all other divers, and you dive like up to, well, the trip that I went on last was 5 times a day. You could dive 5 times a day, and you're living on a boat the entire time. Most of the time, you are not necessarily close to shore. So you could be out on the water for like 3, 4, 5 days or more. And you've got a chef on the boat that makes you amazing food. And like, you don't have to worry. You've got dive instructors and just, it's just amazing. Like, you don't have to worry about anything, and all you do is get to dive.
Yeah, you basically eat and dive. You like get up and have breakfast, and then you dive, and then you have lunch, and then you dive, and then you have dinner, and then you dive, and then you go to bed, and then they move to a new dive site where you're sleeping. And you wake up and do the same thing for like as many days in a row as you want. So yeah, it's definitely like a dream dive vacation for most people, because you can just get so many, like you said, 5 dives a day. If you're diving for 10 days, you can do 50 dives in 10 days.
Yeah. And I love also that there's no like pressure on you to do all of the dives, because with diving, it's a very like type of sport. And if you're not feeling 100% at that moment, like, no one is forcing you to do that dive. So it's really like, dive as much or as little as you want. Most people want to dive more because obviously you've paid to be there and you're in like some amazing location. And it's a really cool atmosphere. But I completely understand how that might not feel like a safe space for a lot of queer and especially trans people.
I think anytime you're going somewhere where there's going to be strangers, is nerve wracking. Like I had that feeling when I was going to the Dive Hard trip. I was like, oh, because I knew Tina Marie and Jim, who are the founder and president and the executive director, and I was like, oh, they're both lovely, but I don't know the other 40 people that are going to be on this trip. And I'm also a little bit introverted, so I was like, 40 people, I don't know. What is this going to be like? And it ended up being wonderful. Like, there was actually a lot of like LGBT folks on the trip, which is great. So like I connected with some people pretty hard, and I'm still like in contact with a good handful of the folks from the trip, and I'm like looking forward to seeing them again. Like I feel like I'm gonna see them again for sure.
Yeah.
So it was a really good experience for me. But yeah, it's like, I don't know. Yeah, if everybody would have had that experience, not because I think there's anything problematic. It's just that it's scary to walk into that environment, and especially like if you're one of the only, like if you're a Black trans woman walking into that environment, that might be a very different experience than me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's
I know the liveaboard that I did was all older white people, mostly older white men. Um, Thankfully, I had gone with someone I met on Girls That Scuba, a Facebook group. So like, I went with a group of women, um, but they were older and white, and like it. I was definitely the youngest person there, and it didn't. I didn't. It didn't bother me so much. So, but that is an atmosphere that I could see being uncomfortable for a lot of people, because while I'm Middle Eastern, I also pass as a white woman. And so nobody looks at me any differently. But that's not the case with a lot of, a lot of people, in a lot of BIPOC people, a lot of trans people, and it's a very different experience.
Yeah, and I really want to create spaces where that are body positive, that like celebrates people's bodies, whatever they are, and then if somebody has scars from top surgery, or their body doesn't fit exactly what your brain's gender says that they are, like, that's not a thing, like I I don't know if I shared this story with you, but like I remember when I went to my dive master, this is like 15 years ago or so. I went to Mexico for 2 months. And before it, I spent a lot of time thinking about if I needed to wear a packer in my wetsuit. So for those of you who don't know, a lot of trans masculine people, trans guys will wear packers so that they feel like that they have a bulge or a penis or whatever they want to call it. It's not something that I've ever felt was important for me. Like, it's not something that I do. But I was like, I'm going to be in a bathing suit. I'm going to be in a wetsuit. Like, I'm going to be around all these strangers. Like, is this something I need to worry about? And I spent all of this time thinking about it and finally decided that it would be more mortifying to have it fall out on the boat than for them to think that I have a small dick. But I want an environment where if somebody's packer falls out on the boat, everybody just laughs and says, like, nice dick. Like, it's not a big deal. You know, because everybody's like, you know, like nobody would be surprised by that, you know, where you don't have to be in your head for 2 months about, and in my experience doing my dive master was great. Everybody was really lovely. I was out to some of them, not all of them. Now I'm out to all of them, like post being there, but still it's, even when I feel safe, if not being out doesn't necessarily feel safe to me because I'm still in my head about being trans. I'm still like, what if these people find out? Now, I'm proud to be trans. I don't care, but will I be safe? You know, and I have the luxury, again, we've talked about this multiple times, of like passing. And so people don't know that I'm trans and I'm white, but I want to create spaces where all of my community comes and is welcomed, and it doesn't matter what your body looks like who you are is who you are. We respect who you are, you know, for people of size as well. Like, you know, like I want all of that to feel safe and comfortable and bodies to be celebrated. There's that like meme going around of like, how do you get a bikini body or a bathing suit body? And it's like, put a bikini on your body. You know, it's like that sort of energy of like, I want people to like wear, or, you know, or like if somebody is wearing a bikini and it doesn't fit your, like the gender expectation you have of them or whatever. Like, it's that sort of stuff that we as trans people spend so much time in our head about, and diving is about getting out of your head. Diving is about like underwater meditation. It's about relaxing. It's about enjoying. It's about feeling like one with the ocean. And so if you are on a dive boat by yourself and you have all of this shit in your head, it's hard to do that when you're on a dive, you know. And I'm sure you know, but there's tons of research that's been done in the veterans community in particular about how scuba diving is incredibly healing for trauma and PTSD. And, you know, unfortunately, lots of other communities have trauma and PTSD, including queer and trans people, especially trans people. And I'm like, how can I translate this magic to my community so they can feel more embodied, they can feel safe, they can feel seen, and they can connect with their body in a way that they maybe never had. In an environment that's curated by a trans person, you know, like that's, I think that the thing that is unique about my business, Narwhal Divers, is that I'm trans, I'm a diver. Both of those things are incredibly important to me. And now I want to figure out how to make those spaces safe for other trans people in particular. That, you know, when I'm trying to get you into a wetsuit, the only thing I care about is that wetsuit fits your body well enough that it will keep you warm. Nothing else. I mean, I feel that same way with my cis clients too. Like, I'm only looking at your body or thinking about your body in relationship to the suit that I'm holding up to your body. It's my cat Minnow. I just think it's important that we, you know, because to me, actually, I think it's interesting, you know, by teaching diving, wetsuits don't fit anybody. Lots of people have like body image issues, right? I think trans people have unique body image issues, but, you know, there's something, most people are not super comfortable like getting in a bathing suit in front of strangers or wiggling into a wetsuit in front of strangers, you know? So it's a very vulnerable thing already. And then you add on everything that trans people and queer people too have on top of that. I think that's why it's really important to have some spaces. Not everybody in the queer community needs those separate spaces, but some people do. And, you know, I really want to appeal to the people that have always wanted to dive, but have never felt like they had a safe space to do it, or never thought about diving at all because they never thought that they would have a space where they felt safe to do it. But now that there is one, maybe they want to dive. Maybe they want to try it out. And I think that, because I think there is a component of that. Like, we as queer and trans people often limit ourselves in terms of what we can have access to or what we should have access to. And we deserve the right to everything that everybody else has. And, equity is not about the exact same service being given. It's about creating services that actually meet people where they're at. And, I think that means like a gentler, more hand-holding, supportive environment with queer and trans folks. And because my career has been around helping healthcare, particularly figure out how to be more trans and queer sensitive. Like, I know, my cat is being a jerk right now. I know how to modify spaces, modify forms, talk to people about these things from my own experience, but also I'm professionally and personally trans, so it's a really interesting kind of like line to have of like, I sometimes, at work will share more than I really want to sometimes, and the benefit that it will benefit the next person that comes in because I have told this person this information and why they should never ask somebody else this. But so, yeah.
I totally get it. And especially as like a woman who is very short, and should have, like, I've worn women's wetsuits. Like, I will tell you, wetsuits don't fit anybody. They definitely don't fit me. Like, the place that should be at my knees is way higher, and the legs are always way longer and like don't really zip up correctly, or so there's so many things that I feel like unless you get a custom wetsuit, those are the kind of things that like everyone feels awkward in.
Yeah.
Nobody has like the body that wetsuits are made for. But it's especially something that's really can be, I don't know how to put this, can be like anxiety inducing for a lot of people, especially if you're like, you want to take the top off, you want to like roll it down in between dives. And let's say you've had top surgery and you have scars, that's something that you could be so super self-conscious about. Mm-hmm. And even if you're passing, but if you're on like a regular boat with people who don't necessarily know that you're trans, that could be huge source of anxiety.
Right.
And something that could really ruin a trip for you, because that's not the emotions that you want to have going into a dive or surrounding diving.
Right.
You want to be cool and calm and collected and feel and allow the ocean to have that therapeutic effect on you.
Yeah.
So we are about 50 minutes in. I want to give you a chance to talk about your business and all of the things that you have going on.
Yeah, so my business is called Narwhal Divers. I picked Narwhal Divers because narwhals are the unicorns of the sea. And, for a lot of people know, like, the unicorn is sort of a symbol of the queer community. So I thought it was a cute tongue-in-cheek sort of way to name my business, but also kind of center my business around the ideas of supporting queer and trans folks. And just for everybody's knowledge, narwhals are real. It's been interesting how many people have asked me, like, are narwhals real? And I'm actually working on a page for my website about narwhals and how they're real. They are, unlike unicorns, which tend to be more of a mythical creature, narwhals are actually real, which I didn't know this, or think about this when I first named it, but I was like, a lot of people think trans people aren't real, but we are. And so I was like, oh, this is really like a powerful like name in multiple ways. Like the more I think about it, is like, no, I'm here. I'm a real person. You know, just because you think I don't exist doesn't mean I don't exist. And so, you know, like I know it's not that serious necessarily with narwhals, but I've, you know, when people are like, oh, I don't know what a narwhal is, that a real thing? And I'm like, yeah, it's a real thing. So anyways, my business is really focused around building community for queer and trans folks, but really anybody that isn't a white, straight, cis man that is looking for an inclusive, accessible environment that can support people. I want to be a resource to people to feel like they can enter into diving with me, learn from me, feel safe with me. And so a lot of my last year has been, and still has been, kind of making friends and making connections. I've, you know, as a community organizer, I really believe that like we are stronger in it together. I believe in collaboration over competition. Let's figure out like where we have these commonalities and figure out how we can support each other. And so I've been doing a lot of, and actually you brought up Nicole, but like the way I met Nicole was I saw she was doing a diversity and diving workshop, because she's friends with Lewis, and I think somehow she popped up in like my Facebook feed, and I was like, oh, so I messaged her. Like, I didn't say it quite like this, but I was definitely like, hey, we should be friends. Let's talk. But I've been doing a lot of that, where I've just been like, this is my business. This is my ideas. How can we support each other? How can we connect? And it's been a lot of really cool opportunities that have popped up because of that. And so like, I connected with Queer Surf, which is an organization that is for all bodies, all identities, all folks that are queer to learn to surf. So it's a very similar to, you know, the things that I'm talking about in terms of diving. And they're doing a Catalina sea camp. That's like an adult sea camp on Catalina, and I'm now going to go down and help them coordinate the diving, because they didn't have anybody that knew anything about diving within their ocean group. And so, you know, that was a friend said, hey, you should connect with Queer Surf. And I sent an email and bam. But there's a lot of other organizations out there. So this year has been a lot of, and will be a lot more like research and connecting, but I'm going to be starting, at least locally, programs around, like, I'm going to be doing, different agencies call it different things. I'm with SSI, so we call it a Try Scuba or Discover Scuba Dive, which is just it's basically like a 2-hour session in the pool where I give you enough information so that you're safe in the pool, but I basically get you in the water, get you diving, see if you even like it. You know, think of it as like a teaser before you commit, because the course is a commitment. And then I'm planning on doing trips. So I want to like do diving trips that are like LGBT centered, but I also want to do learn to dive trips. And so I'm planning on doing at least one locally where we're going to do pre-training here and then go to Puerto Vallarta and finish our certifications down in Puerto Vallarta, which is a very queer friendly city. And I have a friend who owns a dive shop there, and so it's a really easy first step for me. But I also want to do that same thing here in California. So you take lessons, and then we're going to go down to Monterey for a weekend, stay in the same hotel or the same Airbnb, have like a community building weekend where we're diving together. There's a big celebratory dinner. So not only are you learning to dive, but you're making friends and you're making dive buddies, most importantly. I think it's really challenging to find dive buddies. And so, you know, I've also been thinking about like, so my background is in sexual health and community organizing. And so I've been known to do a lot of like pretty sexy, edgy things, but I think sex sells and gets people's attention. And so when I think about marketing, I kind of think about it that way. Like, how do I draw people in? And so one of the things that I've been thinking about is doing speed dating for dive buddies, because I did a lot of speed dating events for like did mixed genders or like for boys or for girls. I did a whole bunch of different ones over the years. And I was like, it would be really fun and really tongue in cheek, because you could have people label themselves as, are you a warm water diver, a cold water diver, or do you do both? Which I don't think that gay, straight, and bi are the only three categories by any means, but I think it's a really cute kind of playful, like, oh, because it does matter. Like if you don't like cold water diving, like you need to know that you're not going to be good dive buddies. Like if you don't want to go to Monterey with me, that's fine. And so I've been thinking about doing events like that. But ultimately, like I want to have like regular trips that are learn to dive trips, but also just divers going places diving. And then I'm working with Dive Heart to create an LGBTQ accessible trip, which is why I was talking about building up a team of folks. So I have people that can go with me when we go to do that training or that trip, excuse me. And I'm trying to just kind of stay open to what the universe is presenting me. I think between all of these connections, like I just met you and Nicole, and like I feel like I keep meeting these people that are kind of pointing me in similar but slightly different directions. And so I am trying to not schedule my life completely.
Yeah.
We're going to the Long Beach Scuba Show, and we're going to be talking about kind of what type of visibility campaign or something that we want to do there. I'm also I'm toying with it. So I am going to the Vermilion Sea Institute, which is 8 hours south of San Diego. And they do a whole bunch of different programs around families, ocean education, things of that nature. And so I got invited by a friend of a friend, but she's also going, but she's a biologist. And they're trying to coordinate basically ocean access leaders, so people who care about access to the ocean, for all to come down and check out this place to see if it's a good place that we could do programming. But we're thinking about the idea of every year going to a different place, resort, having like a leadership retreat, but also checking out that facility. Is it accessible? Is it queer friendly? Is it BIPOC friendly? All of these things as a group. So I guess kind of going back to Narwhal Divers, really what I want to be doing is providing programming. I'm an instructor. I want to be teaching. I want to get people into diving, but I also want to be pushing the dive industry to be better, to be thinking more about diversity and inclusion. The conversation's not happening. Diversity still feels a little bit like a dirty word, which to me is wild, because diversity is like a very gentle word, at least in my vocabulary and my history of activism. And so I think it's really important to create our own spaces and say, hey, we're here, we're part of the community, you should be catering to us, but also being like, we're going to show up at the Long Beach Scuba Show and DEMA and all of these shows and say, we're here, we're queer, we're trans, we're women, we're folks of color, whatever. And we deserve a right to be at the table in these conversations. I think that's one of the, going back to that there's multiple ways of activism. I think that's, I have a multi-pronged tier of the way that I want to do things, is like just teaching and being part of the industry, but also pushing the industry to be better. And that's something, that we kind of have to all do, because it is really, I don't know, it's flabbergasting to me, coming from, I guess, an LGBTQ organizing background, that it's just not even talked about. Like diversity and inclusion is not even talked about. And so I really want to, be somebody that helps push that narrative forward. And I think, by meeting you, by meeting Nicole, by meeting more people, by building a network of people that all have similar ideas and feelings, like there's power in numbers, and people can only ignore you for so long. And I think it's pretty cool to know that there are other people out there like me, because I think I don't know any other trans pros. I know other trans divers. And I think that's another element of what I want to do with Narwhal Divers, is that people don't see themselves in an industry unless they see themselves in the leadership of an industry. We need to see women, BIPOC folks, trans folks, queer folks in the leadership of scuba diving. And so I'm just an instructor, right now, but my goal is to become an instructor trainer, so then I can turn around and teach instructors and become a course director and so that way, as I increase my education, I can turn around and help other people increase their education. And my dream is like one day, maybe there's an all queer trans dive master course that you can come and take, or all BIPOC dive master course, because we actually have enough BIPOC folks in the leadership of these things to organize these sorts of events. So I think that's also very important to me in the both in the short and the long-term goal. Like, I definitely have some friends of mine who I have a friend of mine who I've been definitely like, hey, so do you want to become a dive master? She's super fucking awesome. Like, she's part of the community. She loves diving. And so I'm all about, like, I'm not a pushy person. Like, I will encourage you. I will push you if you want some encouragement, but I don't want to force anybody into anything. But yeah, I definitely want to see more queer and trans folks in particular in diving. And so whenever I find, somebody in my community that is excited about that, I'm definitely trying to foster, like, oh, you want to come be a dive pro with me?
Yeah. And I think what's really important is also seeing more people that are openly queer and trans in the community, just because there may be people, and I felt like that the last event that I went to, Beneath the Sea, where I saw, like, maybe besides our group, right, maybe 2 other people from the community there. And with how many people were in the room, that's it's flabbergasting, right? That, like, there are so many queer and trans people in the world, and they're not being represented in this room at all, So I would love to see tons more people just come out and be open, because I think that for so long in those circles, at least even with myself, it has not been open, right? Like, that was not something that I openly came, like, I didn't go onto the liveaboard and openly say that I was queer. I just was, and I was there, and people liked me for who I was, but it was not a topic of conversation. So I really want to make it a safe space for everyone and anyone to be who they are openly. I also would love for you to tell people how they get in touch with you.
Yeah, so it's in my name, but that is goes to my Instagram. But my website is just narwhaldivers.com. There's a contact me page, or my email is just narwhaldivers@gmail.com. And I welcome anything. You just want to say, hey, you just want to connect. I think, kind of going back to community conversations, I'm the type of person that, like, we might have a conversation right now and maybe none of the ideas or things that we're thinking about make sense for either of us right now, but maybe in 6 months down the road it does. So I think any opportunity to connect with new people and kind of have each other's ideas in our brains, or if you are curious about diving and you just want to ask some questions about it or what you should expect, feel free to reach out, especially if you're in the Bay Area, then I would love to teach you. But if not, if you're not in the Bay Area, reach out. Maybe I can point you in the direction of some people that I know or trust in terms of the dive industry that are going to be queer or trans or queer and trans positive, and you'll be safe with them, because I definitely feel like I've developed a network of folks kind of around. So yeah, please reach out. I would be happy to talk to any and all of you.
Thank you so much for being here and for sharing all of your wisdom and knowledge, and just being so open with everything, your past, your dreams, and everything you're working towards.
Yeah, my pleasure. I think it's really important. Not everybody who's trans has the ability to be able to stand up safely or comfortably, and I have made a career on that, and I feel like it's my responsibility to walk into these spaces and push for these things and make these spaces safer. And so anything that I can do And I think that there's something to be said about being vulnerable and connecting with people, because if people connect to you, it's harder to deny or dislike you or hate you.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, well, I think all trans people are weird and they shouldn't have any rights, but I really like Niko. At some point, they're gonna think about that.
Yeah. There will be enough cognitive dissonance that it'll
not in conclusion. Yeah, and I think that's important. It's like, whatever you think about trans people, I mean, I'm sure I have a lot of opinions about whatever you might think about trans people, but if you like me and you connect with me, that should be really the most important thing. Like, yeah, being trans is one of the many things that I am, but I also have a lot of other things to bring to the table. And so, recognize that, you probably have already met a trans person if you don't think you have. They might even be closer to you than you know it. And also, you should take it as a sign of respect when a trans person tells you that they're trans, because that's a really vulnerable, scary thing to do. And so, it always sucks when you tell somebody that you're trans and that's met with a lot of hostility. So I will often not tell people until I'm sure that they like me. And then, it kind of depends. But I think, again, I do think that it really, there's something to be said about, you can't deny my truth. If I'm being vulnerable, I'm being honest, I'm being who I am, you can't deny my truth. You might not like it, you might not feel great about it, but I hope that you sit and think about it. That okay, I really liked Niko, or I really liked whoever, but X, Y, and Z doesn't fit up with what I dislike. So I guess that's kind of what I would say is it's all about connecting with people, and building relationships. And, when people share intimate things about themselves, that's like a privilege, and that's like a way of connection. But, you shouldn't judge people or think less of people because of one aspect that you may or not agree with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautifully put. And I thank you. You are an amazing ambassador for the community, and I'm so grateful that you exist. Because not only are you knowledgeable, but you are also eloquent, and you can really put into words what we are thinking. Yeah,
I mean, I think it's one of my superpowers that I have to use for the benefit of my community. But I don't know if you can tell, but I get very emotional about this. It is, because this is my life too. I'm fighting for all of us, and it is for me, but it's for all of us. I'm thinking about, and I definitely believe we're not equal until we're all equal. We have to bring each other along. We have to be in it together. I don't feel like we don't have enough time to fight with each other as trans people, as queer and trans people, as women and trans people. We just need to be together on things and support each other to get to a better place, and stand up and be allies for each other. I think I'm always really appreciative when a cis person stands up for me or says something for me, and I don't have to be the point of education around that trans issue, the same way as if I say something as a white person about BIPOC folks, and educate people instead of putting that ownership on the BIPOC person or the woman or whatever. I think there's something really powerful too, that shifts the narrative of it wasn't the trans person that had to correct the thing. And of course the trans person's mad about it, because they're trans. No, actually my cis friend's mad about it, and she's going to tell you off now, And so I think there's something really powerful too, of thinking about how we can show up in allyship for each other. And sometimes it's just really subtle. It doesn't have to be I think sometimes people think activism is really aggressive. I mean, it can be, but it doesn't need to be. How can we just show up in partnership with each other? like a small aside, but like I've noticed, like we're working at a dive shop, a lot of times people disregard some of our female staff, and so, or get kind of like, so I will often like just go stand by her and just like be an extra, and they will often ask me like what my opinion is, and I'm like, I totally agree with her, everything that she said was right. Like I just, I don't entertain really any of that. And so I think that's a really subtle way where I can just like show up. I didn't take over the conversation. I didn't butt in, but I just affirmed that what she said was right.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I especially love when people like kind of defer to me. And so in a conversation, a lot of times people will address either my husband or my partner or whoever the male is in the room. And I always love it when that person then turns to them and says, she's the expert. You should be talking to her, like I'm not the one that should be, you shouldn't be asking me this question. Like she knows what she's talking about. And that has always been, something that like I hold in such high regard, because it's hard to always be the one standing up for yourself, because then you're just the angry person who it has to fight all the time. And it's not taken as well.
Right. I mean, again, we talked about this earlier. Like, of course, somebody should take the word of a trans person over a word of a cis person about a trans experience. But unfortunately, that's not how it always works. And so how can we use our positionality and our privilege to help kind of shift that for each other? Yeah. And I think that is, can be really powerful in these really small ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I feel like we could keep talking for hours, and I might just have to bring you on for like
we can do another
part 2. Yeah. But I want to be respectful of your time as well. And we're already at, like an hour and 13 minutes. So,
yeah. I mean, it's pretty obvious that I can talk about all of this forever. So I would be happy to come back at some point in the future.
Yeah. So anyone who is listening, please reach out to Niko. And if you have any questions or anything you want us to talk about as part 2 of this, please reach out and send your questions to me, and we can schedule another conversation, because I think that this is something that we have to keep talking about, and we should keep doing this on a regular basis, and opening up the hearts and the minds of the people listening. So also, if you know somebody that needs to hear this, whether it's an ally or somebody who is transitioning or somebody in the community or somebody who just needs to hear from a real person in the community, please share this video with them, and like, subscribe, do all the things that you have to do to make this public, and to make this something that people can just see passing by it. All right. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.